Emperor's Eye by Guy Haley. Narrated by Nicholas McGee. Flames leapt up from the half-barrel hearth and made the pictures dance. Simple things sketched in paints of pounded oxide, crushed fungi, and dribbled down byproducts. In the light of the fire they moved with a sacred, secret grace. Daubings of mother rat twitched on flaking steel next to one of the old boulders. The high lord of the spire gave silent judgment from his palace up by the world cave ceiling. Over them all was Emp-Rah, the protector, depicted as a single staring eye. The figures were gods of the true people, as the ratskins called themselves. In front of the fire, close to the gods, was a man so old that even in the heat of the deep-down underhive he was swaddled in a blanket woven with the patterns of fungus, rat, cogs, spin handle, and other natural things. At his side sat a young girl holding a bowl of beaten metal, deep with potent medicines. She cared for him. Age clawed at his bones and his innards. The claxons of his life ran out. He was not long from entering the dark cave whence no man came again. His name was Two Tails, and he was the story singer. Two Tails' leathery skin was broken by a net of shadow. When the grub oil lamps were lit, he was hideous and deep with wrinkles in his flesh, like rumpled up-hive cloth. At his throat his skin hung loose. He was bald, the brown of his scalp mottled with shiny pink blotches. What little hair he had was as fine as a newborn's, and as dry as a corpse's. His eyes were white and sightless, but he was far from helpless. They said he could hear and smell as sharply as a great ducked rat, and that though his limbs were wasted thin as rebar, they were perhaps just as strong. He was old, old. No one lived to so great a tally of years, not ever. But he had. He was at least 40, maybe even an impossibly, to be whispered, 50 years old. 5 others were in the telling cave, 5 braves from the clan of the 5 eyes judged worthy of the journey. 5 braves for 5 eyes. That was the custom. They were young, but storied already in their deeds. Their wrists and necks adorned with honor jewels and rat teeth, glass fragments, and threaded metal nuts. As was the way of their kind, they were totally silent, their sinewy bodies poised ready to move at the slightest threat. Yet, for once, their attention was not diffused through the structure of the caverns about them, rat-whiskered, twitching for peril, but focused tight as a las beam on the ancient man. "Listen," Two Tails said to the braves, "and I shall tell you a story, a true tale of courage and cunning." He whispered the telling, his voice a deathly croak from the dark cave itself, but his words, well, his words were as sharp as plasteel ground to a killing edge. "Listen, and take in my wisdom. It may save your lives in the trial to come." "Now," he said, "before the story, another story. Once there was a story singer, older even than I am now. Tucmar of the shining steel, he was called. Your grandfathers heard him sing his stories when they were babies at their mothers' breasts. As boys, your great-grandfathers heard his tales. You sit where they sat. You hear this tale from my mouth, so Tucmar lives, by blood's continuation and by story. Though he died 30 years ago, this is our way. 30 years!" Two Tails paused to let the vast span of time sink into the mind of the braves. Many thousands of times did the moaning voice of the up-hive wail the passing of time through Tucmar's life, and many thousands more had it done since. This is an old story, a story of power. Listen now, for secrets I shall share. You will not repeat them to the others of the clan, for 4 of you will die, and the last, the only one who returns, shall take my place here, and not say these words until his time comes, and the dark cave yawns its welcome to you as it yawns now at me. He coughed, 1, 2 gentle huffs, and then turned into a throaty barking, then gurgles and gasps for air. The girl offered up the bowl to his lips between corpse breath exhalations. He sipped the liquid from the bowl's rim. The coughing subsided. He shuddered. When he continued, his voice was phlegmy. Like me, Tucmar knew he was to die. 5 braves like you were chosen from the clan, the best, the bravest, and the most favored by Mother Rat. They came to the telling cave, this cave, and were set before the story singer like you are now. They had names like you do, and dreams, passions, and rivalries. These things will soon be gone forever. Stories catch the truest things, but none can keep the wholeness of a brave soul. Only a shadow on the wall. He gestured back at the dancing gods. Their names were Ikik, who was brave but sometimes rash, and occasionally stupid. He was other things as well, but they were already lost from his shadow dance. None but I remember his passion for Man, or his skill at teasing grubs from the chemsoil. And so it was with the rest. Kuma, quick but weak, and Sori, whose anger made him dangerous. Tuor, who it was said was too kind for this world, but whose heart hid desires from other men. And at last of all, Koopa, who never won at anything, and thought he was going to follow Tucmar into the dark cave, the cave of death, as soon as his name was chosen for the trial. Two Tail's head swung across the small audience, as if he could see their rapt expressions. 1 or 2 of the braves glanced sidelong at their fellows, wondering who would die and who would live. Two Tails tutted when he heard them move. It is the story singer's task to ensure that tales are recorded and sung correctly down the ladders of time, that as the claxons wail and the hours burn, the tales are sung and remembered. This is our history and our soul. He drew a deep, rattling breath. No other followed for so long that the braves leaned forward. Then he wheezed out and grunted. When a story singer comes close to the dark cave, then news must be taken up, and up. He pointed emphatically at the low ceiling, where crushed machine parts were fossilized in the ash rock. Up there, to where the Emp-Rah looks down with his holy light, the Emp-Rah, the protector. There are many caverns in existence, not just the thousands around us or the ones in the spire. Beyond the spire there is a world cavern. The world cavern contains many other spires, which stood its floor like pheromites. Each spire has its own caverns and its own true people. The world cavern is so huge you cannot see the ceiling. It is hidden by a rush of mist like one finds over chemfalls. From the top of the ceiling, the holy light of the Emperor's eye burns, the eye that knows all and sees all. He shifted. Rheumatic fingers tapped at the dusty floor. But that is not the end of it. Our world cavern is only one world cavern in this greatest spire of them all, that of the Emperor, called the Great Spire of Terror. There are so many other world caverns in the Emperor's Terror Spire. Hundreds, thousands, millions, each with their own spires and their own caves, on, forever. He let that notion sink in and listened for signs of fear, like the blind hunting centipede listens for weak prey movements in the dark to call it to strike. We worship Great Mother Rat, For her children dwell near us, and she is bounteous, and her multiplicity of pups. Next to her love, Emp-Rah seems distant. That is not his fault. It is not his business to watch every brave. His is the greatest of tasks. He protects every cave, no matter how big or how small, by the holy light of his sacred eye. He guides travelers from cave to cave across the dark spaces between. Without his eye, there would only be darkness forever and everywhere. Think. Mother Rat gives us life, and these are good things from a good God. Emp-Rah is much more than this. He is the guardian of everything and must be respected. Again Two Tails paused, listening for signs of unworthiness. Stuttering hearts, sharp breaths, half-uttered words. There were none. He smiled. So this is what Ik-Ik, Koopa, and the rest had to do, what you must do. They climbed up, far away from our hunting grounds, up high, yes, but further than that, through the lands of the cursed downcomers, and the fringes of the machine lands where the klaxon wail is loud enough to kill a man. Up further, up near the high heavens of the spire lords and their wrathful guardians, and then out. He paused. Young hearts beat loudly in his crumpled ears. There, at the edge of the spire, you must call out into the world cavern. You must look into the holy light of the Emperor's watchful eye, so that he sees you, and inform him that the 5 eyes, his children, dwell still in the caves of the caves of the caves of the great terror spire. Ik-Ik, Ansuri, Tuar, Kuma, and Koopa were given the honor of this quest. Their doom is your doom, and so to guide you I will tell you the story of Koopa. Because of them all, it is best known to me. Settling back more comfortably into the fire's warmth, Two Tails began. Koopa was small but fast, but not so fast as Kuma, but not so weak either. He was not as brave as Ik-Ik, nor as furious as Ansuri. He was almost as kind as Tuor seemed, but sheltered none of the inner wickedness. Yes, a man can be wicked as well as kind. Truth is more complex than tales. Koopa left this cave third. Like him, you will set on your task at intervals of one up high wailing, according to the drawings of lots. His gear was outside this cave, as yours is now. His pouch of spore bread, his skin of water, his knife, rat skin cloak, maul, musket, his bullet bag, and his powder. One of the 2 braves to leave before him had kicked the other's possessions about to slow them down, and this aggrieved Koopa. Koopa picked up his things, cursing the time it took to set them in their proper place. For a second he considered scattering the possessions of his fellows further, but he did not, because Koopa had a good heart. He was away quickly, scurrying into the secret ways of our people, heading for the Emperor's light as fast as he could. Young braves like you wander far through duct and pipe in his youth. Koopa was no different, squeezing through narrow crevices into dome caves few men trod. But though Koopa had explored many hidden places, it was not long before he had gone before the bounds of our clan, and not long after that he had passed out of the caverns of our tribe to lands where the paths were unfamiliar and the people speak a different way and worship other gods. Cautiously, Koopa went from the caverns of the rat into those of the spider people, and that time there was war between the mother rat and the father spider, so Koopa kept his gun ready and his wits about him. The spider people live in huge open caverns, some so big The far side hides in the dark, and the curve of the ceiling can barely be seen. Koopa kept away from the signs of life and found a way through a cave dome not much frequented. He crossed it fast, treading a plain of powder drier than bone, which hid shapes that could have been anything or could have been nothing. He was frightened by the open air above his head, as you will be too. If I cannot bear the sight of this cavern roof, he said to himself, then I shall fall dead of fear in the world cave. Koopa, not so brave as Ikik, but brave nonetheless, forced himself on. Darkness grew around him. Strange noises filtered through the cracks in the dome. The dust hung about him, parching his throat and cracking his nostrils. He was but half the way to the far wall, and already 2 shift klaxons had sung from above, since he had started to cross. Too tired to go on, he slept on a high shelf of stone, hanging wire and metal around himself to warn off spiders. The up-hive song sang far, far away, waking him, and he sat up and looked about and saw nothing stirring in the dome of dust. The place was as still as grave. He slept again. When he woke the second time, he ate a little of his bread. There was light in the dome, strange and constant. It had no source, and that unnerved him more and more. So he ran across the dome's dryness. Coughing on the powder, his feet kicked free. It painted him all over. His nose bled. Small sips were all he took of his water to rinse out his mouth, and these he spat out, fearful of the poisons in the dust of the barren place. Nothing grew. Nothing lived. He smelled death on the wind. Eventually, thirsty beyond endurance, he reached the far dome side. The rush of water drew him on through an ancient portal, and he emerged into a second space where a bright river ran. Water gushed from a high hole in a thin but powerful fall. The boulders around the rush were worn smooth, their reinforcing metal furred orange, and a thunderous fall from the water came down, not far from Koopa, running as a furious stream under a slab bridge of metal plate where it immediately plunged turbulent into a dark lake dammed by a wall of broken stone. Far off in the lake a vortex turned where it drained slowly into the levels below. Koopa's water skin was slack, his throat dry. Eagerly he rushed over the bridge, unhooked his skin, meaning to fill its belly taut. Again in the clean fluid, he swallowed dryly, a mouthful of grit down the throat of sand. But before he plunged the skin beneath the surface, a shape caught his eye. There was a body face down near the water's edge, half hidden by a boulder of ash rock. Koopa leapt up and jogged to the corpse's side. When he rolled the body over, he was met by Ikik's sightless stare and a face poison pale. He looked at the waterfall. No chemical tang or the smell of discharge hung over it. He almost drank. Almost. Still thirsty, he left and went on, finding a way through the fractured rock. Near the fall into the spaces above the lake, another time of rest came. He found a hidden place and set the wires about himself again, and held his weapons while he dreamed of water. The next day he woke with a pounding head and dry eyes, and a mouth too desiccated to swallow bread. He passed a camp in a place of metal and dead machines that had been abandoned for some time. There he found a well. The spider people had marked it, and their signs were enough like ours for him to understand the water at the bottom was clean, and he gratefully filled his skin. In this way Koopa wandered through the lands of the spider people for many klaxon songs, not once seeing any of them. He wasted a long time searching for a way up from the dead and quiet lands, finding one not long before despair set in. A ladder led him up many levels before its end came, closed off by a door shut tight with melted metal. He backtracked and left at the last exit 3 levels below. There he wandered a cavern full of corpses of machinery. It was vast and dusty and smelled of machine life recently doused. Voices reached his ears. He unslung his musket and ventured forward. Around a campfire were a group of men. Koopa had seen Up-Hivers before. He had helped drive them away from Ratskin lands. This group was bigger than any he had seen, and better armed. He was alone, so he hid and he watched. He did not understand their speech. They were wicked-looking, pale but fat, with good eating. They laughed with each other in the way that all satisfied hunters laughed. At the side of their camp was a pile of rat-skin cloaks and spider headdresses neatly stacked, and a jumbled heap of bags and gear. They were scalpers, hunters of the true people, evil through and through. Koopa had to get out before his cloak was added to their trophies. As he was about to leave, a man with his back to him turned to pick up bread, and Koopa spied a familiar object around his neck. It was Kuma's necklace. Kuma's pride was a teardrop of glass. No one else had a jewel like that. Now that Up-Hive man wore it, anger filled him, and a desire for vengeance. He slipped forward silently, close enough that his musket would not miss. Far enough to run away from murder done, he sighted carefully on the man with the dead friend's pendant. He breathed carefully, let the gun settle into his shoulder like it were a part of his body. A single squeeze of the trigger and the man's life ended, splattered red and gray from the back of his skull over his shocked companions. So easy to end a life. They snatched up their guns and began shouting wildly, some shooting blindly into the dark. It was a small revenge. Koopa could not kill them all. Before the echoes of his musket shot had died, Koopa had fled into the small places the Up-Hivers could never see. After his vengeance, Koopa slept little. There were more people in the places he walked, and none of them were of the true people, but all downcomers. From a ventilation shaft he saw a battle in an abandoned place where hairless men fought female braves to the death. In a narrow duct he scared a scavenger hunting through a pile of scrap. They backed away from one another, weapons drawn. Koopa could have killed him, but he did no violence, and nor did the other man. They left each other warily but unharmed. Koopa was wise. He knew that death need not rule our lives. He took a risk, that is true. Many men would have killed the scavenger on sight, and who is to say that he would be wrong? The Up-Hivers hunt us. They come down from the spires, many of them driven out by the spire lord for crimes against their own kind. They take our caves. They are desperate men, and not lightly should any of our kind go near where they are. Koopa had to. As he went deeper up into the caves the downcomers claim, he sought to avoid them, but every way seemed to bring him towards some place they were gathered together, and every time he saw them their number had grown. Empty domes prowled by outcasts and scavengers gave way to the downcomers' farms, where spore molds grow, imprisoned on nets, and not swinging up free where the hive spirits decide, and mother rats' children are imprisoned in cages. At first the farms were isolated, easily evaded, but with every 1,000 paces Koopa went, the downcomers' shacks got closer together, then closer still, until their fields of wire and bars had no gaps between. Koopa was seen and shot at and chased, but few can catch a rat skin. Soon there were cleared roads between the farms and caravans of goods carried by enslaved men upon them. They were quite unaware of Koopa's presence as he watched them, sometimes from a few handspans away, more farms than places where uphivers go for the many things they do not need but covet. There were places with light kept in bottled glass and strange music and the reek of fool water, places of heat and metal where men beat steel into knives and coax life into dead machines. More and more people, people everywhere, and not the true people, not one of them. Then came the town. Sheets of metal 5 man high made a palisade around the town. Heavily armed men guarded the gates. So much noise came from within that Koopa was afraid. He went away skirting the edge of the town until he was on the far side and could move directly away. Relief gave way to dread. He was being stalked by a careful hunter. No uphiver has the skill to track a rat skin for long. Koopa employed all of his tricks to evade his follower. They were not enough. His pursuer was persistent, still following several klaxons after Koopa had left the town behind. In a room off a low cavern, Koopa was caught. "Where are you going?" The voice stopped Koopa dead. A man stepped out in front of him. Though he stank of fool water and the uphivers, he was a rat skin. He spoke the language of the true people. He wore a rat skin cloak over downcomers' clothes, and among the tools and weapons of the uphive were hung the fetishes of our kind, the bone rat, the wire spider, the warding stripes and tattoos that are pleasing to the spirits. "5 Eyes clan," the man said to Koopa. Koopa nodded. It was clear from Koopa's markings where he was from. Anyone could read them. The stranger squatted down. "I am Ukpa. Talks big. I was snakes running," he said. "Snakes running are no more," said Koopa, "killed or taken by the uphivers." "I am not dead," said the man. "Your clan lives? Where?" "I am the last." "You are a bad skin?" The man tipped his head and smiled. His teeth were black with the food of the downcomers. His scent was rotten with foreign smells. "I would be called so by your elders," he said. Koopa gripped his musket. A bad skin was the worst kind of rat skin. No loyalty, no honor, no clan. All they care for is the uphivers' worthless creds and their wicked fool water. "What will you do with me?" "Anything I like, boy," said the bad skin. "I am a man. You are not yet grown. I have lived among the downcomers for a long time, and I have killed many people." He patted the uphive guns he wore at his side. "You are fresh from the whelping pit. Tell me, what are you doing all this way up here? This is a long way from the 5 Eyes territory." "Nothing," said Koopa. "Lie if you want. I will kill you," said the bad skin. He shrugged like he meant it, and took a flask of fool water from inside his jerkin and swigged it hard. He offered it to Koopa. Koopa shook his head. The man shrugged again. "One more time. What are you doing here?" The flask went back into his uphive jerkin. One of his pistols slid out of its holster. It pointed at Koopa, like the man had nothing to do with it. "I am on a quest of Emp-Rah," said Koopa proudly. "Our story singer is old. He will die soon. I must go up to the world cave floor and shout up to the light to let the Emperor know the 5 Eyes clan still dwells in the far caves, or our story will come to an end." Upka Talks Big burst out laughing and slapped his leg. Koopa looked on confused. Upka's mirth ran away from him, shouting louder the further from Upka's control it got. The badskin was crying before he stopped laughing. "What is funny?" said Koopa. "Life is funny," said Upka. "I have learned much here about the spire and the world cave. Let us leave it at that. You laugh at a secret task. If I do not speak with the light of the Emperor, how will he know our people still live?" Upka looked at Koopa strangely. Maybe something about Koopa's sincerity touched his black heart. You want to go to the surface? I don't want to go, said Koopa. I have to. Upka gave him a long, hard look. His gun hovered halfway between ending the boy's life and going back into the holster. Leather rasped as he put the weapon back to sleep. All right, said Upka. Then I'll show you the way. Upka took Koopa away from the Uphiver settlements. First the noise of downcomers faded, then the farms became further spaced, until towards the edge of the dome cavern there was but one last farm. Long ago burnt out, Upka led Koopa through a door into a maze of shifting corridors, whose layout rearranged itself continuously. For a period of 2 klaxons they rested amid the clanking and whirring of the labyrinth's aged machines. Upka drank his full water, sang Uphive songs, and fell asleep. Koopa did not dare. They came to the end of the moving maze 6 klaxons later. The noise of the machines was louder than ever. To make himself heard over their clanking speech, Upka leaned so close to Koopa that his full water breath washed over him. We leave the underhive soon. Be careful here, whelp. They went through a set of doors whose side panels shone with fake light. From the arch above, a guardian skull watched through glowing glass eyes, not like the dead machines of our lands, whose lenses are broken and see nothing. Upka strode through the door, gargled fractured words of Uphive speech. Koopa leapt back. Upka laughed at him. Do not be afraid. What does it say? Said Koopa, as the door repeated itself. He did not dare to cross its threshold. It wants to know who you are. The spirits in these doors are watchful, but no one pays attention to them. This place is abandoned by the Uphivers. The machines live on a while, but they will soon be dead. Still, be wary. It means we are close to the caves where the Uphivers work. Come on. Reluctantly, he followed Upka. There were lights here, shining in the ceiling, and strange noises sounded from above. They reached a ladder lit by lights so dazzling Koopa's eyes ran. He squinted hard but could not see. Bright? Upka said. You'll get used to it. He put a hand on one of the rungs and looked upwards to where the ladder vanished into a faraway distance. Machine noise echoed down the shaft. Now, we go up, Upka said. We go quietly. This dome above us is in use. There are many people here, many machines. If we were seen, they will call their warriors. Upka hit his chest. The warriors have iron skins. Your musket will not harm them, and though I will kill many of them, with my Uphive guns, we will be killed. Koopa nodded uncertainly. Upka rested a dirty hand on Koopa's shoulder. This world you are going to see is not like any cave you have seen before. It will be difficult for you. Koopa had no idea how difficult. They climbed up and up. There the klaxons sang so loudly the first time one sounded, Koopa nearly let go of the ladder in fright. The wailing blasted down the ladder well, a great spirit warning them to go back. But Koopa had to go on, and he pushed aside his fear. The noise of the machines loud and above Upka. The tube's smooth false stone was replaced with an open metal mesh, letting in light that was red and hot. Upka looked back down to Koopa and signaled with a finger to his lips. Quickly, he whispered, and quietly. They hurried on, hand after hand. Koopa risked a look out the side of the mesh. There was a cave like hundreds of others he had seen, but this one was alive. All the machines and many things he had never understood to be machines before were working. Giant fans chopped at the air, sprays of sparks fountained up from the spinning blades. Streams of molten metal poured from great buckets into molds, sending more sparks bouncing over the floors. Huge weights stamped down on flat metal, turning it into all manner of shapes. Giant men with muscle arms as thick as Koopa's chest worked with enormous tools, beating plates of metal still hot from their making. It was a god's smithy, populated by strange beings. He gaped. Upka kicked his head and shook his own, and motioned for him to climb. They passed unseen from that place into another sealed section of the shaft. The din of the forge followed them for some way, the heat further, funneled up the ladder well like smoke up a chimney, and it got so hot that Koopa felt faint. Upka scurried on, and Koopa did not dare stop, nor take a drink of water, nor show any sign of weakness this bad skin could see. A klaxon blared, shaking Koopa's head and his skull. Suddenly the ladder ended. Upka was upon the sill of door, extending his hand. He hauled Koopa up. That manufactorum will be abandoned soon. The ash is deep above. This part of the hive is unstable. We must be careful. We must go quickly. And quietly, Koopa concluded. Upka smiled, his black-toothed smile. That is so. They wandered down long and crooked tunnels, some of them old builders' work, some hacked through soft stone, not yet set hard, and smelling of up-hive filth. The first tremor hit them soon after, a great quaking and drop in the floor, so pronounced Koopa's stomach lurched. The hive spirits are angry. We must get away from here. Have you an offering? Said Koopa. Upka motioned him to silence, while he scanned the roof for weakness. When the shaking subsided, he spoke. It is not the hive spirits. The city itself shakes. This part is drowning in ash. The weight makes the walls shift. More of your up-hive nonsense, Koopa said. Not nonsense. Truth, said Upka. This way we go. It goes outside the city. We are nearly there. To the world cave? It is not a cave, Upka insisted. This passage here, outlaw smugglers use it to bring in spook and old things from outside without the High Lord seeing so. You lie. Suit yourself, said Upka. He shrugged. He drank his full water. Koopa scowled. They went on further. Koopa ranged a little ahead, wanting little to do with the bad skin, fearing he was being led into a trap or tempted from the ways of the true people by Upka's up-hive lies. He got further ahead until Upka was out of sight behind him. Koopa, Upka warned. Beware! Another tremor, bigger and more violent. Koopa was thrown from his feet into the dirt. The ceiling roared and jerked like a thing in pain, and with a tumultuous rush collapsed inwards, spilling heaps of rock that fell into ash powder as they broke apart. Coughing, Koopa got up to his feet. He waved the dust from his eyes, but could see nothing through the shifting clouds. He soaked a rag with water from his canteen and wrapped it around his face to save his lungs. Gradually, the dust settled, revealing the cave-in closing off the road. Upka was nowhere in sight. Upka, he shouted. Upka! His voice was swallowed up by the hive. He felt it pressing down upon him like it wished to crush him, daring him to shout again and give it a fairy reason to wipe his story from the tale of his clan. Upka, he whispered. He was totally alone. The fall towered over him, filling up the tunnel completely. He heaved helplessly at a few of the rocks, but they broke apart and let more ash slide down from above. From the top of the slumped materials there came a spill of debris and a digging. A small hole opened. Fingers opened and withdrew. Koopa clambered up the fan of debris. He lay on the stone in the dust, forced to reposition himself as it shifted under him. Finally he found a good purchase and peered into the hole. A narrow tunnel long as an arm led through to the other side. In the gap, Upka's eye appeared to be replaced by Upka's mouth. Koopa of the 5 eyes, he said, I cannot come further. I must go back, and you must go alone. You are close now. Soon you will reach the outhive. I wish you luck. Upka, Koopa cried. I need your help. You will succeed and return home, said Upka. I am a Badskin. I know a survivor when I see one. Listen, you must do me a favor for my services to you. What? Asked Koopa. When you see the Emperor's light, you must cry out that Snake's Running still lives in me, said Upka. But you do not believe. Upka's lips smiled around his black teeth. I do, and I do not. Do it for me, so the story of my clan will not end yet. I shall, said Koopa. Good fortune. May the great hive spirits watch over you, Upka said, and withdrew. How will I know the way? Koopa called. Upka was gone. Not knowing any other way, he took passages that went up and away. The tunnels grew very dark until there was no light of any kind, and he lit up his small lamp to guide the way. The sound of claxons fell behind him until he could hear them no more for the first time in his life. No matter how far he had roamed in the other hive, the claxons could be heard wailing their wail, marking the time. Not there. Instead, there was a creak and moan of angry spirits threatening to bring down the roof. Koopa was frightened, but took it as a good sign also, seeing in the noises the bad spirits' desire to keep him from his goal. He had to be close. I will not stop, bad spirits, he said. I will find the Emperor's light, and call out my clan's name so our story will not end. He was tired, but he went on until he was past the groaning place and its angry spirits. Darkness drowned him. With his little lamp he found a space, set up camp, and fell asleep. Jangling metal on wires woke him a fraction of an instant before a heavy, clawing body thumped onto his. Teeth snapped a hand's breadth away from his, showering him in an arid spittle. He flailed with his arm, jamming it into the hot wetness of a mouth. He screamed as teeth slid into his flesh. Blood splattered his face. It hurt so much, but the teeth were kept from his face. Koopa had his knife in his other hand. The teeth opened, moved off his arm, and snapped at him again. He shoved for room and thrust for survival. The thing on him jerked back and forth twice, squealed, and fell dead, with Koopa's knife in its heart. Koopa heaved it off himself and got shakily to his feet, knife hand pressed at his wounded arm. He hunted about for his lamp with his foot, kicking several times into the side of his assailant. Finally he found the lamp and ignited it, though by the time it had lit, it was slick with his blood. Curled in death lay a giant, furless rat. Warty growths covered its back. Its face was squished and flat, the teeth sticking out at strange angles. A small head lay alongside the bigger, and though the mane was dead, the lesser thing still mewed pitifully. Still alive, Koopa looked around in fear. The great rats run in packs, but this deformed example was too monstrous for its fellows to bear and was alone. He lifted his hand from his injured arm. Red blood welled from the wound. He forced himself to look at it, probed the deep gash. He could move his fingers, though it pained him greatly to do so. He dressed the wound as quickly as he could, lest the scent of his blood draw worse things to his side. And though in terrible pain, he did not cry out. Then he turned his attention to the rat. Corruption shot its body through, so he could not eat its flesh. But in its long whipcord twin tails Koopa found a fine trophy. He cut them free, leaving them joined by a scrap of skin covered in wiry hairs. He wrapped them around his waist like a belt. He flexed his arm and winced in pain. For a moment he considered going back. He looked down the rough tunnel. He had to go on for the sake of his clan, so he did. Time passed unmeasured by the claxon's wail. His lamp burned low and went out. The tunnel was too dark even for rat-skin eyes, and was so very quiet Koopa wondered if he might have been dead and passed into the dark cave without realizing. His good hand trailed along the wall. The drip of blood from his wound was loud, his heart louder. His imagination filled the dark with horrors. Surely he would die here. A sound gathered in the dark, low, breathy, and sorrowful. A weeping wind that rose and fell, and brought strange scents. Light joined the wind. It came slowly, so slowly he did not realize he could see. He walked into a gray space that felt even more like death than the black. But the shapes of mortal lands resolved themselves from the gray. The tunnel took form around him again, and he stepped into the land of the living. Ahead of him was a stout iron door, not old builder made, but the ugly trash of the uphivers. Around its ill-fitting edges the light glowed and the wind breathed. There was no lock, only a handle. The door sagged and dragged at the gritty floor as he yanked at it. It dug in, turning over a curl of dirt until finally it burst inwards and Koopa looked out into the world cave for the first and only time. Wind, angry at his trespass, leapt at him, pushing him back. Light blinded him. He leant into both. His teeth gritted and forced his way through the door against their objections. It took moments for his eyes to adjust. When they did, he dropped his gun at what he saw. Before him was the largest space he would ever see. He stood upon a cliff top, its compacted face made of broken things from times long gone. A rough stair wound downwards close by his position, skirting outcrops of dead metal on its way to the endless world cave floor. He turned, fearful of the floor, and so looked upon the home of his home. Giant cliffs went up forever. Gates and vents studded the sides, from which endless falls of ash, smoke, and up-hive rubbish poured. He was outside the hive. He was looking at the thing that contained all the caves he had ever known. He had thought himself well-traveled, but how few places he must have been, he realized now. There was space inside this one spire for 1,000,000 cave domes, 1,000,000,000, more than any ratskin could visit, more than any man could count. He turned back to the long sweep of the world cave. The walls could not be seen, but vanished into a haze 1,000 miles away. All around the cave were more hives, dozens more, spikes like pheromites stabbing up, their heights lost behind racing vapors. How much smoke and dirt the uphivers must make to hide so high a ceiling. Truly the world cave was a filthy place. His heart sank. The wind stank of burned things. It scorched his nostrils. It thickened the spaces of his lungs. He coughed and wet his breathing rag and pulled it over his nose. But even freshly moistened, it could not stop the dirty air from poisoning him. He could not tarry there. He must perform his duty and go, or he would die. He looked up at the ceiling. Its powerful glow made his eyes weep, but there was no single light, no glowing eye of the Emp-Rah to speak with. "Where is it? What do I do?" he whispered. "O great rat mother, O Emp-Rah, what do I do now?" The gods must have been listening, for their answer came swiftly. He heard the yip of a war cry. A body cannon into his wounded arm, and Koopa yelled in pain. He wrestled with a clutching hand, dodged a knife thrust that would have pierced him through the eye, bucked, punched his attacker in the face, and leapt back while his foe was reeling. "Tuor," he said. Tuor it was. The other brave stood facing him, knife ready for the kill. "I thought I was the only one to make it here," he shouted over the screaming wind. "I should have been the only one." Koopa drew out his own knife with his good hand. "We don't have to fight," he said. "There can only be one story singer," said Tuor. "Only one can know what lies outside." "Wait!" shouted Koopa. Tuor charged at him, knife whistling. They fought. Tuor and Koopa were skilled fighters under other ceilings. They were a match, but Koopa was weak, and though Tuor's body was marked by his journey, he had no wound like Koopa's. Koopa was going to die. Once that thought enters a man's head in a fight, then he surely will. Desperation sent Koopa's knife slashing across Tuor's arm, spilling a sheet of crimson over ash-stained skin. Tuor hissed and pressed Koopa hard, forcing him back to the cliff edge. "If I cannot stab you, you shall fall," Tuor shouted. The wind screamed louder, buffeting them, making them fight all the harder. Tuor pressed his advantage. Perhaps it would have been Tuor who would have returned had Emp-Rah himself not taken a hand and decided who should bear the burden of the sacred task. For a moment the racing smokes of the cave world ceiling thinned. A pale disk appeared, glowing brighter and brighter until the smokes parted and violent light poured into the world cave. Tuor was facing directly into the Emperor's eye, while Koopa screwed up his eyes. In his surprise, Tuor looked up, and the holy light hit him full in the face. He screamed at the Emperor's terrible brightness, then screamed again as Koopa's knife punched through his chest and into the hollow between the halves of his rib cage. Tuor slid off Koopa's knife and dropped to his hands and knees, mouth open and dribbling blood as quickly as his punctured chest, and a second later he was dead. Koopa's eyes burned with the light. Blindness drew its blanket over his side as he turned into the glare. The pain was great, but he stared into the Emperor's eye, defiantly to deliver his message as Tucmar had commanded. "Hear me, O Emp-Rah. I am Koopa of Five Eyes clan," he screamed into the howl of the wind. "I come to say Tucmar the story singer goes into the dark cave soon. Listen to me, Emp-Rah, and hear my words. The story of the Five Eyes clan goes on in the dark, under the roots of the great hive in the world cave of all things. We live, our children grow, our braves fight. We sing songs of your light, and we honor Mother Rat. Five Eyes clan lives, Snake's Running clan lives. We live." The light dimmed and flared as clouds scudded over it. A sure sign Emp-Rah had received his message. Then more clouds came, hiding the eye. Intolerable dimness returned. Koopa staggered away, his vision swimming with bright spots that would never, ever leave him. Two Tails drew in a long, tired breath. "And that is what one of you, and one alone, must accomplish." How Koopa came back to Five Eyes clan is another story, one that now will never be told. When Koopa whispered all that had happened to Tucmar, Tucmar nodded sagely and vowed it true. Shortly afterwards, Tucmar went into the dark cave, and Koopa took his place, and for many years he sang the stories of our people. By the time he came to sit here, Koopa's eyesight was dying, scorched from him by the Emperor's holy light. But he did not mind, for the clan's story continued. He drew in a wheezing breath. "Now, you may ask how I know this so well." He reached behind himself and pulled out the ancient trophy that gave him his name. A piece of leather bearing two tails. "I know this, for these are the tails of the rat that attacked Koopa there in the dark." He pointed at his face. "This is Koopa's face that witnessed the awful might of the Emperor's eye. These are Koopa's eyes that lost their vision to the glare." He touched a scar on his arm. "This is the wound that dripped blood upon the faraway soil of the world cave cliffs." And here he patted his chest, is the heart that beat so quickly as the clouds parted and the great Emperor looked down upon Koopa. His voice thickened with coughs, fighting up his throat to steal his voice with their barking. "I know these things," he gasped, "for I am Koopa, and this is my story." He coughed many times. The girl offered more medicine to him, and when he was done, he waved weakly at the braves. "Now I am tired," he said. "Leave me. Go forth. My time to go to the dark cave draws near. Seek you Emperor's light, and tell him we yet live for all our sakes." Thanks for listening. I'd never read a Necromunda story before this, but I did end up liking this one. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you can recommend them in the comment section, and I'll be reading all those comments. And if you could, leave a like on the video. And as always, have a great day. Goodbye.